Hello, this video is about comparing different moral systems. I'm an English teacher, and I have to do a thing called English Corner every once in a while, which means I have to make my own lesson plans and tell students about things. Sometimes I just have discussion topics, often I do PowerPoints. Sometimes I play games, sometimes I show them videos. It's hard to show them videos though, because China blocks YouTube. But anyway, this is for advanced students. I read a book a while ago and called The Decline of the West. I really like it. And I thought I would make a PowerPoint for the advanced students and hopefully they would like it. I suppose it's mostly a listening activity for my students. But I thought if I can explain it to my students so that they can understand it, then it's definitely simple enough that I can present it to a general audience. Okay, so this PowerPoint, as you can see here, is about comparing different moral systems. And I'm warning my students this is an abstract topic, so it's difficult. Abstract as opposed to concrete. That means I'm not talking about anything you can touch or see. Okay. Oswald Spengler is the author of The Decline of the West, the book I read, and a lot of the ideas in the PowerPoint come from this author. I really liked his book. The main idea of his book is that every culture has its own idea of meaning and purpose in life. The creative phase of a culture lasts about 1,000 years. Afterwards, the culture does not produce anything new. That means there's only so much that can be said about any particular idea. And the idea of the book is that he found a pattern in history where each culture goes through similar steps in the development of their idea, and it takes about 1,000 years. And there's a lot more that can be said about that, but I'm just going to move on. It's called The Decline of the West because he argued that the creative period of the West is from about 1000 to 2000 AD. Okay. But this PowerPoint will focus on moral differences between different cultures. Western civilization is in Western Europe and its colonies. Maybe Poland, for me Poland is kind of iffy whether it's in Western civilization. I think it is in there. Yes, I think I would include Poland, but I think Poland is as far east as Western civilization goes. And I would include it there because it was Catholic, I think. Yes, I think everything that was Catholic and its colonies, that can be included in Western civilization, at least for me. And I have to explain colonies in other words to my students, but I'm doing this for native speakers, so I'll just skip it. Western ideas of morals are centered around intention and the effects of actions. If you try to do a good thing, then that means you're good. And in the West, a man of character is someone who lives his life with a goal or purpose. And Western stories are about individuals finding purpose and doing great deeds. This may seem obvious. Actually, when I was at school, this is what I was taught, that this is universal. But it's actually not true. This is just true for Western people. It's not true for other people. Other stories don't have character development. Okay. The West is very focused on actions. And you can see this with a lot of things. In Western painting, it's often a snapshot. Or the West is focused on space and time, big spaces, time, and action. That's what the West cares about. So the paintings often show distance, like with the foreground and background, and they're often a snapshot in time, where something important is happening. This is Doubting Thomas. Okay. So I just explained the art. And that's also why the West invented calculus. Calculus explains how things change over time. That's very important to the West. And I don't know about other languages, but I know in English and German we have perfect tenses, and they exist to show effect. For instance, if I say, I've already eaten, I'm trying to tell you that I'm full, I don't need to eat. So there's an implied effect usually whenever you use the present perfect. And other perfect tenses, often you say the effect more explicitly. Like I can say, I wasn't full because I had already eaten. But whatever, I can move on. And the West has also produced the most impressive technology because of this focus on action. So I have just a few examples of moral actions. Jesus is considered good in the West because he saved mankind from hell. Jesus, for Western Christians, is a lot like Superman. He saves people from bad people. Superman and Jesus and all of the heroes in the West, they are very similar. They go do great things and they save people from bad stuff, usually bad guys. And modern social justice warriors think they're good because they're making society more fair and equal. And I grew up in the USA, and I know Americans have the idea that wars are always fought to accomplish a noble objective. We fought the Revolutionary War for freedom and independence. We fought the Civil War to save the country and end slavery. We fought World War II to save Europe. And recent wars are fought to protect democracy. Democracy is a lie, but that's a different topic. Here are some moral dilemmas that are common in Western philosophy classes. So if there's a war between two countries and a Western power decides to join the war in order to stop the fighting, and you know which power it is, but I don't usually say it in my class. The Western power joined the war in order to stop people from dying, but more people died because of what they did. What do you think of this situation? Is the country good or bad? Now, most Americans, they seem to think that we should try to stop it. But all of my Chinese students, they agree that, pretty much all of them, they agree that the United States is bad to do that kind of thing. That is not their business. They don't have the right to try to do that. So it's very interesting to me. There are cultural differences. There are clear cultural differences to me, because when I talk about this in philosophy class, or I was a student, but when I was a student in philosophy class in the USA, I'm pretty sure that the students said, many of them argued for it, or even just regular conversations. I know with my family, they think that we have to do something. I disagree with them. I suppose I'm still a Western person. I think that in terms of making a good effect, but I think that we've screwed up so many times in the past. We've shown that we don't have the wisdom to know the right action. So we just shouldn't do it anymore, because past experience shows that we don't know what we're doing. So I suppose I'm a humble Westerner. But most of the foreigners, they don't even get to that point. They just think that the premise that it's your business to interfere with other countries, that's already wrong for them. I remember this from philosophy class too. I think they were talking about utilitarianism. Imagine there are 5 people in a hospital who need organ transplants. They will die without new organs. The doctor at the hospital kills an innocent, healthy person in order to take his organs and save 5 sick people. What do you think of this situation? Now, I remember in the philosophy class, the students were kind of divided on this. There was a discussion. There wasn't really any discussion among my Chinese students. They universally condemned this. And the idea to them that it's kind of like math, that it's -1 and +5, and therefore the result is +4, and that means it's good. For them, that was kind of strange. Okay, I'll go on. For Oswald Spengler, and I agree with him, ancient Greece and Rome were actually a different civilization than the modern West. And ancient Greece and Rome included ancient Greece and its colony, Rome. And for them, what was good is what is virtuous. And for them, virtues are eternal, which means they never change, and they are given by their gods. And a good man is one who acts virtuously in a bad situation. Um, and for my students, this was an English class, so I gave them the opportunity to guess which virtue goes with which definition. Here are nouns and here are adjectives. And here are some definitions I made up. Okay. But you're native speakers, so I'm just going to move on. And what I was taught is that, I might have learned this at university, sometimes there's more than one way to act virtuously. For example, if you catch someone who stole something from you, it's good to punish him because that's just. It's also good to let him go because that's merciful. So for Greeks, there's often more than one right way to act in a given situation. Okay, and then I gave my students a worksheet where I had some example situations and they need to match them to virtues. And the Greeks, they very much liked eternal forms. So in Western art, it often shows space and action. The Greek art just showed the form. If this were a Western statue, he'd be doing something. But it's Greek, so he's not doing anything. He's just there. You see him. He's sexy. Yep. And that's why the Greeks invented geometry. For the Greeks, it was important for them that the eternal is present in the moment. And that's why they invented geometry. That's why they have a virtue-based morality. And it is why their art looks like this. And this actually, this has a different origin than ancient Christians, but it affected the philosophy of ancient Christians because basically the first country to convert was Greece to Christianity, and they had these ideas when they came in. So ancient Christian writings are very heavily influenced by this idea of virtue-based morality. So here's a comparison between Greek and Western philosophy, and I don't know if modern Greeks are still a part of this culture. I've never been to Greece. I think modern Greece might be something different than the ancient Greece, but anyway, for modern Western people, what's moral is the intended effects of actions, whereas for Greeks, virtuous actions are moral, and generally it isn't necessary to consider the effects of your actions. So long as you are performing a virtue, that's a good thing. So in the West, that means we have the idea that the end justifies the means. Greeks do not have that idea. And in Western stories, there's character development, and character development is about individuals finding purpose and life goals. Whereas in Greek stories like Oedipus, or the Iliad, or the Odyssey, there isn't any character development. The plays are mostly just a way of giving the characters an opportunity to show their virtues. I read the Odyssey. Actually, I remember in high school, my English teacher tried to force me to find character development in the Odyssey. And I was struggling because I just couldn't find very much, and I felt like I had to bullshit my way through it because I just felt like I couldn't find it. But then I read this book a couple years later and it clicked. There was no character development. The Greeks didn't care about that. They didn't have that idea. The Odyssey is just a whole bunch of bad things happening to Odysseus. And Odysseus showing how much of a badass he is in those bad situations. And for instance, Oedipus, him accidentally having sex with his mom, that has nothing to do with character development. Having sex with his mom was a complete accident. He didn't want to do it. If it were a Western story, it would be about how he was so sinful and deserved to be punished because of what he did, or maybe he repented and decided to be something different. But the Greeks know it didn't have anything to do with his intentions. It's just something bad that happened to him, and he had to deal with it. Okay. And then there's also what Spengler called the Magian culture. I decided not to introduce that word. I just decided to call it Arabic or Ancient Christian. Spengler considered the ancient Christians to be the beginning of the creative phase of Arabic culture. And early Judaism for him was kind of proto Arabic culture, like it was kind of like Arabic culture was simmering under Judaism, but it started boiling on the arrival of Jesus. And all of the monotheistic cultures come from the Arabic. All of the monotheistic religions come from the Arabic culture, and its creative phase was approximately from 0 to 1000 AD. And ancient Christians were concerned with inner feeling. For them, what is good is to feel rightly, and good actions come automatically from good feeling. And ancient Christians, as I understand it, they thought Jesus was good because he taught men to feel rightly, and that's what it means to be saved. And that's different from the Western idea that we imagine there's a literal hell. And I think ancient Christians also believe there was a literal hell, but for them, the division between symbolism and fact was not as clear as it is for Western people. But anyway, modern Western people imagine Jesus to be more like Superman. He's a hero who saved us from the bad guy devil, from like tangible physical torments. But for the ancient Christians, they had a more subtle idea that Jesus taught you to feel and act rightly. And God knows how to feel rightly, and mankind doesn't know how to feel rightly without God's help. And sin is to feel, think, or act wrongly, and God does not like it. And part of Spengler's idea is that the beginning creative phase of a culture is always very spiritual in nature. It is very religious. The culture idea always expresses itself religiously at the beginning. And then the intellect of the culture develops in order to try to more clearly express the culture idea. And as the intellect of the culture develops, like the culture invents its own math, the Arabic culture invented algebra, I think because of the variable. The idea of the variable is that the number has its own hidden value, kind of like how they believe every material object has its own inner spiritual meaning. That seems to me kind of roughly similar to the idea of a variable, and that's probably why they invented it. Anyway, they invent their own philosophy, and they invent their own math. And in the case of Rome and the West, modern Western civilization, eventually it produces secularism and atheism, where the people are able to express their culture idea independently of God. And that kind of produces a cultural crisis where they throw away everything that the culture was founded on. And it can destroy the culture. It looks like the West is destroying itself now with the help of Jewish culture distorters. But anyway, Jews come from the Arabic culture. And they weren't very healthy for Rome, and they aren't healthy for the West either. It looks as if the Arabic culture was, if not the main reason, but then definitely a contributing factor to the fall of both ancient Rome and modern West. But anyway, what was I saying? Oh yes, the reason Islam is so prevalent now in the area that it is because Islam is a more externally focused religion. The ancient Christians were focused on inner ideas, whereas the modern Islam is more focused on outward action. You have to do all these different things, like pray I don't know how many times a day and toward Mecca, and you have to make a pilgrimage and things. The ancient Christians were much more focused on the inner development, and in the process of development of the Arabic culture, the culture became more outwardly, externally focused. So it didn't produce atheism, it looks like, in the Arabic culture, but the intellectualization and externalization of the culture toward the end of its creative period seems to have produced Islam in this culture rather than atheism and secularism like it did in the Western cultures. Anyway, I'll move on now. Oh yes, and for ancient Christians, the most important virtue was love. And here are some quotes from Jesus to demonstrate this. "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside they're full of greed and self-indulgence. Blind Pharisee, first clean the inside of the cup and dish, and then the outside will also be clean." And obviously the cup and dish is a person. He's saying, have good feelings on the inside first. Reject the bad feelings inside yourself, and then your outward action will naturally be good. And then another thing he said is, "But what comes from the mouth proceeds from the heart, and this defiles a person." So he's saying eating dirty food doesn't make you dirty. What bad words that come out of your mouth make you dirty. And then I just have some definitions to help my students. And then for the ancient Christians, like I talked about, bad actions came from bad feeling rather than bad actions. So the ancient Christians were very focused on feeling rightly and therefore not having sins. And the sins, of course, are pride, anger, sloth, envy, gluttony, lust, greed. And the ancient Christians, they didn't have 7 deadly sins, they had 8 passions. And one of the passions was despondency, which means hopelessness, which was a sin for them because you should hope in God. Maybe your life sucks, but if you're faithful to God, then after you die, then good things will happen to you. And the ancient Christians believed there was a right way and a wrong way to do everything, or at least to feel. So an example of wrong work is to feel angry when other people do bad things to you, and that's because you can't control what other people do. Being angry at other people is useless. So they thought it only makes sense to be angry at yourself when you do what you know is wrong, and that being angry at yourself will help you to change. And I agree with that. I try to follow that myself. For them, it was also wrong to be envious of other people who have more things than you. It's only good to be envious of other people's virtues, so that you can try to get the virtues yourself. And they had these kinds of ideas with all of the vices, the sins. The ancient Christians believed God created all of our emotions, like anger and sloth and lust and gluttony and those things. And so they believed that there are righteous manifestations of these feelings, but that you have to learn to develop it. And these are just 2 examples of envy and anger. And it's also wrong to have... They believed everything was for a purpose. God made everything for a purpose. Eating food is for nutrition, and sex is for procreation. And anything else is sinful. And the most important thing for Christians is that it is wrong to think highly of yourself. You should thank God for everything you have because you're given your talents at birth, and everything else that you have, like your money and your inheritance, your education, that was given to you by your parents. So everything you have was either given to you by God or by other people. So there's no reason to feel good about yourself, is what they thought. And I agree. Although I don't usually tell my students that, I try to be impartial. And I just asked my students, have you ever heard of this before? The ancient Christians believed that if you do a good action, but the feeling is bad when you do it, you're still bad. So if you tell someone you forgive him, but you're still angry at him, that's still not very good. And if you help someone, but only so that other people will think good things about you, that's also bad. And telling someone nice words when you don't really mean it, that's also bad. And I notice this slide kind of makes my Chinese students uncomfortable, because this is like directly opposite to how Chinese people think. Chinese people are very concerned with face, like what other people think about them. To me, it looks like Chinese morality is basically based on face, doing what your society and what people expect from you. So, actually, I kind of have the impression Chinese people don't like each other very much, but you can't tell because they're very focused on saving face, both their own and other people. So they might hate somebody, but be nice to him because they want to look nice. And so, like, all of their feelings towards someone can be absolutely nasty, but they will, at least when other people are watching, they will treat you very nicely. So this seemed to make my Chinese students uncomfortable. And when I asked them, do you think it's unfair to expect other people not to have bad feelings? Every single one of them says, yes, it's unfair. So the Chinese people don't, they've, at the beginning when I told them about feeling rightly, they seem to understand that. They've heard of that idea before. But the idea that good actions aren't sufficient if you have bad feeling, that makes them uncomfortable. The Chinese idea of morality, I think, is most directly opposed to the ancient Christian, at least for me. So here's a comparison between ancient Greek and Western. For Greek and Western, they had different ideas about what actions you should take, but they're both action-based. And the ancient Christians, for them, feelings are more important than actions. And Spengler says that Russia is a new civilization just entering its creative period now. So it's just barely getting started. And I lived in Russia for a year and a half, and I noticed that Christians in Russia pay special attention into changing into something better. What they call it repentance. I notice there's a very strong emphasis on repentance in Russia that I didn't see in the Greek Orthodox Church, or in any other church for that matter. And Russians are always very curious about foreigners and often try to be like them. You might not know this, but during the Napoleonic era, Russian nobles learned French. And after World War II, it was very common for Russians to learn German in school. And when I lived in Russia, a lot of Russians were just very curious about me, and they wanted to know everything about me. So Russians like to change. And this is also shown in Russian grammar. Russian verbs always come in pairs, one for a completed action and one for an incompleted action. So the verb for to be reading is chitat, and the verb for to finish reading is prochitat. And they have this for everything, like pisat and what is it? Napisat, that's to write. Celivat and po celivat, that's to be kissing and to finish kissing. They even have that for kissing. I forget a lot of words. I can't remember a lot of words. I can't remember the word to cook. I should remember that. But anyway, another thing that in Russian, where they show that the words in Russian also change a lot. So depending on the grammatical context, the word mother can be pronounced either like, it can be pronounced like mama, mamu, mamai, mamoy, and mamya. And they're all actually the same word, mother, in different situations. So for me, I wonder if morality for Russians is to try to be something better than they are now. And that might have been why the communist revolution was able to take place in Russia.